Hello, everybody, and welcome to Coffee Class with Young Screenwriters. We are an online resource and community for up-and-coming screenwriters, and today we are going to talk about voiceover and when it goes wrong. This is part of our little, I guess, kind of a mini-series about things people tell you not to do, and when they're right and when they don't know what they're talking about to tell you that. Um, and we are joined by our good friend Avi, who we
Hello.
are super glad to have back. Where
Super
are
glad to be
you?
back. I am in Salt Lake City right now.
Oh,
I don't
Just
see a
found a
lot
nice
of
little
lake or
park.
salt.
It's in the
All
air.
right, that was a bad joke. Kept that to myself.
I barely see a city.
how is it?
It's pretty great. There's some really lovely stuff out here. I'm here for a film festival, so I'm just kind of passing the time until that starts.
Oh, which one's that?
That one is Film Quest. It's a genre film festival in Provo that I go every year.
Oh, nice, super
Yep,
fun.
it's a very fun
Um,
time if you got genre stuff.
mhm.
Yeah, give me one
And
moment.
Akiva's asking about the audience. Yeah, our reminder email doesn't go out until 4:05. So just like
That's a
we
terrible
give
idea.
people
It
no,
should
because I
be.
don't. Because if we start a couple minutes late and it went out at 4 and someone clicks it, they're gonna show up to an empty
Gotcha.
space. So I'm
Gotcha.
like, we'll
You
just
got your logic.
chill.
Mm,
You're factoring in the lateness. That's good.
Yeah, I am. I have to
it makes
account
a
for
certain
it.
amount of sense.
No, it does. It does. Okay. But our
Oh,
audience, our fan base is totally dried up, and you're just in an empty room with two people, just
yeah.
us.
We just hang out just us now.
We're just kind of
Um,
chilling and chatting, talking
Oh,
about movies.
yeah. So,
so, so just to build off what Alexie was saying, this sort of mini series on like things you're not supposed to do, flashback or not supposed to abuse, flashbacks, voiceovers, things that are really, uh, it's almost a red flag when people see it on page one just because of how badly it's done. But we're here to talk about, hey, maybe how to have it be part of intentional design of what you're doing, and what to, why to have it and why not to have it, and the pros and cons. I think Avi just did a Dune-a-thon, and I think this is the
I did.
perfect example where we could talk about voiceover. Not to spoil the new one, but
No spoilers
it's
here.
interesting. What did you think? The first film versus the new film, just the use of voiceover.
So I don't know the books, so I was entirely new to all of it. And I will say there's a lot of world information that has to be conveyed. And the way the book does it, I'm told, is just kind of doling it out through the story as it goes. The way the new film does it is in a sort of general kind of dramatic, putting you in the story and kind of letting you figure it out from context. And the way that the 1984 David Lynch version does it is just by having everybody's thoughts projected very loud as voiceover. And that's after like the first 2 minutes are a princess staring into the camera telling us all of the sort of background information. It just kind of feels like the Star Wars crawl, except you're supposed to pay attention to it. And
And
somehow that makes
her
it
gaze is very unnerving too.
it's unnerving and it fades in and out. But I will say that there's something somehow having it all explained to you makes it even more incomprehensible. Um, because now it's like, all right, well, let me just explain. It's the year 10,191, and there's the House Atreides, and also the House Harkonnen, but also there's the Emperor, and then the Emperor controls both houses, but they control the planet Arrakis. It's like the more you explain it, the more sort of it just becomes words in your head, and you zone out. And then if the story starts with a sort of assumption that you now understand all of that, um, you don't actually understand any of it. Whereas if you actually manage to teach it to you dramatically through characters making choices and visually, um, you retain a whole lot more. And it's interesting because it keeps happening in these movies where, particularly in the 80s, where if there's information that the producers are worried we won't understand, they will add voiceover or they will add monologue. It happened with Blade Runner. You look at the original
Yeah.
Blade Runner, the original cut of it has a very bored Harrison Ford um, narrating the whole movie, which has been stripped out of all subsequent cuts. Um, Voiceover as exposition is dangerous. It's dangerously dull.
So this is kind of interesting. So you have to think of the voiceover. You have to think of whose voice are we listening to, right? Like the default voiceover, I would say, in a film is the protagonist's voice, either in the past telling you something, or like having it be. I don't think it's usually like Dune is a very weird example because it's rarely often you actually have like people's like in real time thoughts happening. That's a very strange.
In Dune, it's like in a comic book having thought bubbles, but it's
Right.
for every single character in every single scene.
Is this Dune? Have you seen the new Dune, Adam?
I have not yet.
I have.
Yeah, I haven't. Me and Adam and Carl were gonna go. I wasn't sure if Adam snuck ahead.
I wouldn't speak ahead. I want to see it in IMAX with y'all. So we're gonna see it next weekend. I know exactly what it's going to be though. Like I'm a huge fan of the books. Or say I was when I was a kid.
It has one voiceover. It does have one voiceover, and I think it's a very effective voiceover.
Is it in the beginning?
It's in the beginning. It's in the beginning. It is not Paul.
Oh.
It is the character Chani, who is played by Zendaya.
That's
and the voiceover, it gives you a bit of information, but it ends on a thematic note and not an exposition note. It is not like in the original film, which I think literally ends with the Emperor's daughter saying to the camera, "Oh, and I forgot to tell you, the planet is also called Dune," which then cuts to the title. They don't do that here.
Oh man.
Yeah, but it's funny. I was just thinking about, in the Discord before we started, Alexie, you asked me if I had any scripts in mind for voiceover, and one of them just popped into mind because I was just at the Cinestory Writers Retreat in Idlewild, and they had us read a script. They had sent us one script to read before we showed up, and it was How to Train Your Dragon. Has a very
the
first one has a very strong expositionary voiceover.
I'm trying to see if we have that. That might have been one of the ones I'm looking for, so might have to call me up at some point. But there is a really strong voiceover in that film. It's a really good movie. How to Train Your Dragon is
the first one I remember I really liked.
It's
so
really
just getting back to while you bring that up. So,
but that also, the reason I brought that up in relation to Dune is that also has an opening narration that's kind of threaded through the opening scene that ends with, "Oh, and I forgot to tell you." But it works there. It works for a host of reasons, but one of them is that it's not just trying to give us a glossary before the story starts.
Right. And do you want to know something? With the original release of Dune, they actually had at theaters distributed pamphlets of expositional information that they distributed through the audience, like a glossary of terms that when at showings of the movie.
Because that's how you make movies exciting. Glossaries, homework.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, I saw that floating around. I saw somebody had one of the original pamphlets.
You know what they haven't done in way too long is Pokemon the movie. When you went, you got that ancient Mew card. I haven't gotten cool stuff going to a movie since. Why not? That was amazing. I loved it.
I was just at a used bookstore in Hollywood. and they had a whole section that was just like weird promotional tie-ins that they give you at theaters. So they had like stickers for the first Scooby-Doo movie.
All of this, like I want a Marriage Story sticker,
Yes. A Marriage Story card.
Right.
There should be trading cards for each movie. That'd be there we go.
A Michael Clayton commemorative pin.
Right.
So here's a quick. Let's go ahead and define voiceover real quick because I realize that's a good place to start. Because Michelle said, "With the scrolling text before Star Wars count as a voiceover in a sense," and I would say that in this case, ish,
not so much.
But like not really. It accomplishes like a very similar thing to like people doing voiceover at the beginning of a film, but I'd say the main difference is that you're not also seeing images. It's just kind of like a sequence at the very beginning. And that's why I'd say it's different than voiceover overall. In this case, when we're talking about voiceover, we're talking about a non-diegetic sound. Isn't that the right one?
Yeah.
So in films, there's diegetic sound, which comes from within the scene that you're looking at. So like people talking, people like swords clashing, you know, monsters, whatever. It doesn't matter if it's like actually something you captured in your camera or not, right? It's just sounds coming from the scene. And then non-diegetic sounds is stuff that goes on top of it. So that would be things like voiceover.
Yeah.
And so voiceover in this sense is a non-diegetic sound. It exists outside of the movie and is some sort of commentary laid on top of it. And it is generally, I'd say always, a character speaking directly to the audience in some capacity. And it's identified by in normal dialogue, putting VO in parentheses right after the speaker's name.
Yeah. If
Do you all have anything to add to that definition?
if the Star Wars crawl was accompanied by a voice, whether one of our characters or not, reading it out loud, that would be the voiceover.
Or it would be like Luke, you know, after looking at his aunt and uncle, saying, and that's how the story of how I started meet my dad, you know,
Right.
You know,
It's like
this is how I met Obi-Wan, and I felt terrible, you know.
Yeah, like if Luke learned, you know, he's about to blow up the Death Star, and he hears a voice in his head from Obi-Wan saying, "Use the Force." If we then heard Luke's voice saying, it's like I could hear him in my head, you know,
Yeah.
but he's not actually moving his lips to say it, and it's just for the audience's, you know, for clarity's sake. That would be a voiceover.
So,
And
just
by the
to
way,
add
like
on
you could
to,
have a voice. Oh, sorry, I'll be fast. You could do what the opening crawl of Star Wars does with voiceover, which is deliver that exposition. And there are ways to do that well and ways to do it poorly. And you know, the original Star Wars movies do it well with the text. There's a different effect, I think, on the viewer of hearing somebody say something and reading it as text on a screen.
For sure. And just to add to what you were saying, Alexie, I do think that there are some variations to this. Like, I don't think it's always a character in the story. Sometimes it is a narrator. I would say a narrator is a character.
That's kind of what I was saying. By character, I was saying like someone whose name's going to be in caps in the center of your page. So maybe that wasn't the best term. It's just
so like in Royal Tenenbaums, there's a narrator who's outside of the movie commenting on it, but he's still inside of the movie, and his commentary is part of the narrative. Like, he's giving exposition, he's giving commentary. A lot of exposition is commentary, and sometimes when it feels just additive, or when it feels redundant, I feel like that's often when it kind of feels clunky. But when it feels like it's giving you new information or it's creating a contrast, like you'll see something play out and then a character tells you, like if you see some clusterfuck of a social situation come out and then the voice of the character says, "I thought that went pretty well," that's doing something different than just like giving you information. Like it's creating putting new information onto the scene. So I feel like there's a lot of things you can do, we can talk about. But
well, information itself is not dramatically interesting to an audience. And that's why the best movies find a way to deliver information in dramatic ways. A voiceover is one of the easiest ways to just deliver pure information. And because it's easy, people people fall into the trap of doing it. The trick is finding a way to deliver that information with a voiceover that has another function. So like if you're revealing an insecurity of the character, and not just by telling us this character is insecure, but by having that sort of come out through a certain neurosis, or by having a sort of a cognitive dissonance, or like the example you just gave, Adam, of having that kind of contrapositive, right? Of like, we wouldn't know otherwise that this character can kind of take this in stride, potentially. It depends on how you use it, but if it's just a character telling us through voiceover, if I put my hand in the box, I will feel pain.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Or like in Harrison Ford's voiceover for Blade Runner, which was famously added when producers thought it might not be clear enough for audiences. And he sounds like the most bored, angry person on earth who's been asked to do this thing. There'll be like a moment where like an android character, or a replicant rather, will die. And Harrison Ford looks at him dramatically. And then the voiceover says, "It was sad watching that replicant die." It's like, we know, it's all there.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Had voiceover. So I remember Fight Club had voiceovers, but only incorrect ones. You know, I still need to watch Fight Club. That's my
It's a overrated movie, but it's actually really good at the same time. Like I think it's good.
It's a worthwhile thing to watch for a craft.
Definitely.
And I think what Akiva's talking about there is how, and that was Akiva, right? Showed up very small on my phone.
It was.
Hi, Akiva. It's this really interesting thing where the voiceover is this unreliable narrator, where he is kind of walking us through his emotional journey of the story, but his emotional journey of the story is not actually necessarily accurate to what's really happening. So we are getting false information, but it's sort of filtered through the emotions of this character, and emotions that aren't necessarily broadcast. And by the way, that's a way to play. Like, is there a contrast to what's happening? So, like, if a character is sitting there very stoically, very kind of calmly, just nodding at somebody talking to that character, and then the voiceover is just "arg," but that is dramatically interesting. There might be other ways to convey that information, like if you just sort of cut from that board meeting to the character punching a wall later. But if you want to play a contrast, that is a way to do it. So, like the Fight Club character, he has these contrasts with what's going on, sort of in front of our eyes.
And not to spoil it, I'm not going to spoil it completely, but like his belief about what's happening is not the full picture. He's lying to himself and lying to the audience at the same time, which is an interesting. That in and of the situation itself is interesting, and it's given more insight and drama because of the voiceover. So I think, like, if you have to be a question, oh, should I do a voiceover or not? Does it create drama, and does it create a new dimension, or is it just redundant or tedious?
Yeah,
so,
and in a story like.
I was going to say, maybe it'd be worth bringing up. I have Fight Club right here. We have some scripts that we can start pulling up if you want. The opening page of it is very interesting. Here.
It's from the 90s.
Yeah.
This is Fight Club. And let's take a peek at this opening voiceover. It says, people were always asking me, did I know Tyler Durden? And
that's such a good opening line for this movie. That's a really good opening line for this movie.
It has a dramatic power kind of laid into it.
Yeah.
And then look at this. Do you see Tyler has the barrel of a handgun in Jack's mouth? They struggle intensely. Jack says, or I. With a gun barrel between your teeth, you speak only in vowels. With my tongue, I can feel the silencer holes drilled into the barrel of the gun. Most of the noise a gunshot makes is expanding gases. Totally forgot about Tyler's whole murder-suicide thing for a second, and I wondered how clean the gun barrel was. So it's interesting. So this is, I think, a really cool example of, like, this is new information on top of a scene that, like, it's adding something to the scene. It's not just telling you exactly what's happening underneath it. Like, it's not just narrating what's happening. It's interesting commentary on top of a different image, which I think is really important for voiceover.
Well, a voiceover can't show, don't tell necessarily, right? Because obviously it is telling and not showing, but it can demonstrate, sort of like it demonstrate, don't tell. And this demonstrates something about the character, which is, in a situation where he has a gun in his mouth, his mind can't help but wonder about the hygiene of the gun itself, right? That demonstrates something about the character, as opposed to if the gun was in his mouth and the voiceover was just, there's a gun in my mouth, I'm going to die. It's like, well, we get that. What's interesting here is that you're caught up on the weird minutia of it.
Yeah.
That's how it tells us something, but it demonstrates, and that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind with voiceover is, are you demonstrating something that isn't apparent, as opposed to just kind of talking us through something.
Also, he's not talking he's not speaking with like the emotional expectation you normally would have of somebody in that situation. Like the fact that he's calm and he's able to dissect like the most of the noise a gunshot makes is expanding gases. That's like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
How does he know this? He's the type of person that knows that, and also he's able to think about that when his gun's in his mouth.
Yeah, he is not telling us who he is and what he does and what his emotional standpoint is. We are learning all of that from what we're given. We're being given context clues essentially, as opposed to a voiceover just saying, "Hi, my name is Tyler. I am this kind of neurotic person, and I'm also a little jaded." And
we should all do that for ourselves when we meet people. Give our own voiceover introduction.
There was in the recent M. Night Shyamalan movie, Old. There's a scene where these children are kind of going around this resort, going up to random strangers, saying, "Hi, what's your name? And what do you do for a living?" And then like the character will say, "Hi, my name is such and such, and I'm a cop." And the kid will say, "That's interesting. Bye," and then run off. And like that's a cute thing to see a kid do, and I feel like we get a lot of that sort of unironically in voiceover. Like not in that movie specifically, but every so often I'll see something where it's like, "Hi, my name is so and so. I am this for a living." It's like, all right, that child from that Shyamalan movie. Nice to know.
Reminds me of The Room, right? Where you have like, he'd tell his friend, I forget the line exactly, but he'd tell his friend this horrible like thing that happened to this woman. She gets beaten up and stuff. He says, "Ha, funny story, Mark. Anyway,
Anyway, what's new with you?
What's going on with you?" Oh no, it's my favorite was the news just got in. I definitely have cancer. Anyway, don't see that guy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, to be clear, I'm not saying that what Shyamalan does with those children is bad. I think that it's an interesting thing to have a child do, because the children might do that. But sort of applying that kind of to writing, where if you are writing, you don't want to be that child. You don't want to be the child that's like, "Here's the character. Here's what they do for a living. Interesting. On to the next thing."
This is a great voiceover, Andillo. They really should have to do the rewrite.
It would be, "Hi, I'm Tyler Durden. Sometimes I go by Jack, only when I'm asleep."
Spoiling the hell out of this movie on this podcast.
It's been out 20 years. It's been out 20 years.
Oh, man. This is I forgot about this. I love this. Theo says, "We're watching Desperate Housewives right now," which is interesting with the narrator being the dead housewife. I forgot how hard that show went. Like, it was not messing around. They killed that woman right off the bat, didn't they? Man, what a good show.
I never saw that show.
The women in my neighborhood would gather to watch it during an event they called Pajamas and Pearls. And they would wear pajamas and pearls and watch Desperate Housewives. And so, yeah, it was
amazing.
I know.
I love it. I wish I was there. Do you have the script for How to Train Your Dragon?
I do.
Can you bring that up? Because I think there's some really interesting stuff to learn from that, because that does have the whole like, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. This is where I live." Like all of that kind of stuff. But I think it does it really well, in part because the tone in which it's delivered demonstrates the personality of the main character, and also because as the information is being doled out, it's mingled with actually proving it. It's like, like it might maybe like there's some sarcasm mixed in there, but every so often it'll be like, "And here's such and such character. He's a doozy," and then cut to that character like launching a goat at a dragon or something like that. So it's sort of mixed in with the demonstration.
Hey, Adam, do you want to be Hiccup?
I'm okay.
I can't read it on my phone. It's too small.
All right, I'll do
it. Alexie, it's all you.
Oh, no, you go, Alexie. Go, please. I want to hear
I'll read the narration for you, okay?
Great.
You got to do it in the full voice. Fade in.
I don't know what he sounds like.
Like a dork.
Sounds like
a dork.
Oh, so I'll just do me. I'll just do me.
Yeah. Just do you. There you go. Fade in. Exterior, North Sea Village, night. We skim above a dark, wild ocean. The camera turns toward a lone island, Burke. It's a gigantic shard of rock jutting straight out of the water.
This is Burke, It's 12 days north of hopeless and a few degrees south of freezing to death. It's located solidly on the meridian of misery. The camera drifts over rolling hills to reveal a small village nestled on the outcropping of sea
actually-
mountains. That's what his dialogue says. That's a mistake.
I bet it is a mistake. Is this what yours looked like, Avi?
Yeah.
That's a page one mistake.
It's
Pretty
okay.
bad.
It's the 19th revision in the studio. So like they at this point they're not caring about typos.
All right, my
So
village
here
in words
too.
is sturdy. It's been here for 7 generations, but every building is new. The camera drifts closer, circling. We have fishing, hunting, and a charming view of the sunsets. The only problems are the pets. You see, most places have mice or mosquitoes. We have sheep graze peacefully on the hillside. Suddenly, one is snatched.
You know, I think the draft that I read didn't have those errors, but it is the same dialogue.
It's the same
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
It's the same writing. I just think it was reformatted, but it has. But like the thing that's really interesting about this voiceover is, on one hand, it's delivering exposition. Welcome to the islands, and here's the problems we have. But it's laden with this really specific attitude, also, where what's being demonstrated is who who Hiccup is, and not just what he is and where he is. And if you sort of skim through the scene, it's kind of loaded with that. At the very end of the scene, after we've met all the other Vikings and they fought dragons and all that, and Hiccup has made some mistakes, and the chieftain is looming over him. Then the voiceover says, "Oh, and there's just one more thing," and Hiccup looks up at the chieftain and says, "Sorry, Dad." Now, like, you can get away with a lot of this because it's a children's movie, but I think the part of why it works is that voiceover could have very easily just been, "Oh, and one more thing, the chieftain is my father," but instead, "Oh, one more thing," is to set up how we're supposed to feel about it, but then the information is delivered by this child looking up at this giant, Viking man who's really disappointed in him and saying, "Sorry, Dad." And from that, we know the information. So like it's demonstrated and told, which works really well. Like I keep thinking about, I had a mentor once, a writer who said, particularly when you're working with studios, you want to show and tell, because sometimes the hands need to be held a little bit. And I think in the case of a children's movie like this does both. And if it had just done telling, if it was just voiceover of, "I'm on this island and we got the dragons and my dad's the chieftain," it would have been Dune.
Like this one is, so maybe we'll get Avi's not messed up formatted version, but like they do things where they are creating interesting things with this voiceover right here, like where he says the only problem are the pests. You see most places have mice or mosquitoes. We have, and then we see a sheep grazing peacefully on a hillside, and so you like have this expectation of like, oh, they have sheep, but then suddenly one is snatched. And then we see dragons swooping in, blasting fire, doors slamming, everybody screaming, and he says dragons. So if they're setting up an interesting thing, if they just said, and we have dragons, and then we saw the dragon, that is a much less interesting contrast. The voiceover to what you're seeing on the screen.
Yeah,
So,
make us feel the thing that you're telling us about instead of just telling us about it, because we have to care. And also, it makes me think about if you're like teaching a class and you have access to PowerPoint and you have like visuals, where it's like you're flipping through the visuals and you might be talking about it. And it's like, and we have next visual picture of a giant angry dragon, dragons. It kind of feels like that, where you have these sort of visual aids. What's interesting about the voiceover in this movie is it's just in the opening sequence and then again the very end. So like most of the story is not told through voiceover. It's just kind of the place setting. But then once you do it at the beginning, it kind of earns it by bookending it at the very, very, very end, where it feels like, okay, because it has returned and because you used it to wrap up what you started, it feels like a stylistic choice instead of just a crutch.
Yeah. So Maxim, this is why we want to talk about voiceover. So Maxim says, as cool as narration can be, is it a general rule of thumb that if something can be conveyed visually to avoid voiceovers, for that matter, even dialogue? So that's what we're getting at right now, is that this is like when we were talking before about flashbacks and what's it called? What was the other one we did? We're doing flashbacks, voiceover,
Exposition.
and exposition, yeah, and just like different ways that information, different things you're told not to do in a script, and when people can pull it off, and why it works sometimes and why it doesn't. That is the rule of thumb that people are told. People are told that this is a red flag and you should not, don't do voiceover. But it's not always true. It works in some films, and so we're looking at.
But let's
why
talk
it
about
does and why it doesn't.
Alexie, let's talk about why people say not to do it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So my short version, this is the most simple explanation I can give, is that like this is the artistic aspirational version, and then there's the gritty Hollywood reality, right? The aspirational version is that there's one unique aspect to filmmaking as opposed to photography and playwriting, and and it's editing, right? It's being able to show shots in sequence, the visual the sort of the progression of shots in time is unique to cinema, right? And there's this idea that if you can communicate through the juxtaposition of shots and images a story without leaning too heavily on dialogue, without leaning too heavily on these sort of other cheats, you can achieve more clarity and I should say just power. There's an accumulated power to a story that doesn't rely on cheats, where the audience believes the images they're seeing. This is just my understanding of it. I'm sure you guys have a better version, but like if you have a story, My Dinner with Andre is like for me a great example. It's like a story that there's absolutely no cheats in that film. You're just watching an hour and a half conversation. Not to say that it's the best film ever, but like you believe that you're in that room with those two people. You don't jump through time. You don't go anywhere else. It's although you could say that film relies on dialogue, so maybe I'm totally bullshitting here.
Well,
but like, what do you think about that?
Have you? I think back to Robert McKee's book Story, which is really dense and very philosophical, little navel gazing, but it has some really interesting ideas in it. And there's one page about voiceover where he starts off by saying voiceover can work, and he gives some examples of it working, but then he rails against it and says, in general, I think the quote he uses is, "We are not refugees from the novel," which it's the most pretentious quote in the world, but I love it. But it's like,
that's a great line.
Yeah, it has this sort of vibe of, how do we convey information in a movie? We convey it through sound and image. If it's just a person telling you things, that could be conveyed in pretty much any other artistic medium, essentially. And I feel like just in practice, I don't really know necessarily the reasons behind it. I'm sure it probably comes down to how much audiences hate feeling manipulated, even though they're being manipulated all the time, but we always hate feeling manipulated. I feel like if a voiceover is not actively adding something to the scene that the scene is better off with, it is actively detracting from it, because it is essentially sullying what's already there. So like, if the voiceover doesn't add emotion to it, or doesn't add something to the tone, or doesn't otherwise kind of give you something that you don't have, then it feels like you're being taken out of the scene. It feels like you're being taken out of the story. I'm not necessarily sure the psychological reasons behind that, but I do feel it every time if I'm watching a movie and I'm really invested in a scene, and then I hear a voiceover telling me something that I already know, or telling me something that I could figure out, or something that I want to figure out, because I think there's a real joy in inferring things from context. There's a real joy in inferring things from behavior and from character interaction and from conflict, and kind of pick, like when two characters are arguing about something and they're throwing details at each other to kind of bolster their claims. We as the audience are like, oh, I just learned a piece of information in there. Oh, I just picked that out of that. Whereas if there was just a voiceover kind of telling you that information, the audience is not involved. We're just sort of sitting there and taking it. And I think the audience likes feeling involved in parsing through the narrative, if that makes sense.
It's a joy to make a connection yourself, right? And
Yeah.
you take away that joy from somebody when you sort of tell them.
Yeah. That's why, like How to Train Your Dragon, like that one moment of like the voiceover saying, "Oh, this thing I forgot to tell you," but then we get back into the scene, and then he's looking up at this giant man, and he says, "I'm sorry, Dad." There's still that joy of like, oh, that's his father, right? Like they all but tell you. They very loudly all but tell you, but they leave just enough distance for you to say for you to still be learning it from a context and not from you to be learning it from a pamphlet or a glossary or whatever they give out it to.
Yeah, it's like it kind of reminds me of if you were seeing a movie with a friend and they were whispering the voiceover into your ear, how much would it piss you off? You know, it's like if that happened, if that was the whole thing that happened in How to Train Your Dragon, and he said, "Oh, there's one thing I forgot to tell you," and then he says, "Hi, Dad," then your friend said, "That's his father." How much would that make you mad? You know,
That's brilliant. I love that. Yeah,
so
it's that meme, right? It's the meme of like watching Chappie and then the robot shows up leaning over to my date. That's Chappie.
Exactly. So how much would it bother you? And then if it would annoy you,
I love that.
take it out.
That's great. I love that.
Let's see.
But then there's the example of the narrator being a character telling you something from the future, right? Like Grand Budapest Hotel briefly has a narrator to sort of tell you about that time he went to see this guy, but then we see him meeting the guy.
Yeah.
You know, like sometimes it can lead into something if it's a weird if it's really sometimes it's the best way to present something.
There's a I mean, sometimes we're willing to accept blatant exposition if you've made us desperate enough for it. Like if you've done the work of making us need to know, then when somebody just tells us to our face through voiceover or through whatever, we're willing to go there. But that's quite a leap that you're making as a writer to make sure, like, I hope I earned this. Because all these examples that we've been giving of good exposition, there is still that inference that you can make. There is still a piece of information that you're allowed to, you know, kind of share or allowed to kind of figure out on your own from context. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is a good point. The friend whispers in your ear, the sound of a gun is mostly expanding gas. I wonder how clean that gun is. At least that
more
would
interesting.
would be more interesting than that's his father. You know?
Yeah. Well, you know what's a really interesting example of voiceover? Have you ever seen The Informant, Steven Soderbergh movie with Matt Damon?
Yes. Long time ago.
Yeah. And it's been a long time since I saw it, but I do remember that the character is supposed to be, he's a corporate informant who's kind of dumb and is, you know, he's revealing information about illegal practices that he's kind of involved with. And his voiceover is always something kind of happy-go-lucky and kind of stupid. So, like, there'll be a voiceover where he's just thinking about, why don't we, you know, brush our teeth while we're waiting for the conditioner to settle in on our head? You know, like, that saves you time. And, like, that's happening while he's, like, in a scene discussing crimes with somebody. And what we're learning from that is, oh, this guy is just not very bright. And he doesn't realize the weight of what's going on. And that's something we as an audience can infer from context. And we feel that joy of, oh, I just figured this out from watching the movie. Whereas if the voiceover was just, I'm dumb. It's like, I haven't learned anything. I probably chuckle a bit, but I haven't learned anything, and I don't feel like I've done any work. I feel like it's all been done for me, and that's boring.
So there's been a point brought up by Akiva and Michelle, which is that both point back to genre. So I think that's worth talking about real quick. Michelle said if the genre is noir, I just go with the voiceover. It's such a big part of it. And that's exactly true. There's different expectations in different genres. In, like, fantasy, sci-fi things in particular, people are a little bit more forgiving of some sort of voiceover in the beginning, like establishing world. That's just the way it is. In noir, it's a part of, like, the joy of the genre a lot of times. And then the reason why I was connecting it to Kiva's comment here, this was something we talked about when we talked about flashbacks, actually, for Squid Game. About no,
I haven't had a chance.
I think you'd like it. It's
so I'm told.
I liked it. I thought it was. I don't know. I feel like this sort of thing is now big because of the anime generation in America. You know, like, we're conditioned to sort of like certain, like, for example, the flashbacks in Squid Games. I actually didn't really mind them because they felt like an anime flashback. It's like additive. It's supposed to be it's supposed to be manipulative. I don't know. I gave it a pass.
Yeah,
I can't judge it
that
yet.
was
You can't
kind of
judge
what
it.
we
You have to see it.
like. I think that's also something seen in more of these shows that are anime adaptations, like where they're trying to really emulate that medium. Which game do you think you could survive? Ooh, that's a good question, Adam.
None of them. I die in marbles.
Wait, but I haven't thought
Well,
about.
everybody die. Half of the people die.
I haven't thought about the noir voiceover.
Yeah, give us the
thing.
thought.
I feel like that started because a lot of those were sort of based on novels, and it was in an era in the 40s where voiceover was kind of de rigueur. Like a whole lot of movies in that era would just sort of standardly have voiceover, which is sort of expected, and eventually kind of got weeded out as people realized that we can probably do better without them. But because noir was so, I guess, singularly developed in that era, when you hear voiceover in a noir now, the feeling that you're getting in your head isn't, ooh, exciting, I'm learning new things. The feeling in your head is, ooh, this is a throwback. You know? So there's a different kind of joy that you're getting, which is just the, I'm experiencing.
Oh, we lost Avi.
Oh no! Come back, Avi. But I think he was
He'll
making
come back
a
soon.
point.
But no, but that's a good point.
Oh, here he is.
Somehow, I don't know how I got booted. I just fell out.
I said
we hated what you were saying, and so we got rid of you.
But
Talk about
yeah.
noir.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny how you watch noir, like they're like, it gets away with a lot because sometimes you have really good flowery language in there and some really interesting lines, and you're learning information about a mystery, so you're still kind of moving forward in something. But I feel like it does still kind of remove you from the immediacy of what's being dealt with, right? Like it puts it all sort of in retrospect, as opposed to kind of like you're in the moment living it. And that's a vibe, that's a tone. Maybe you're adding that. You're trying to add a sense of everything you're watching has already happened, and we're watching it from a 30,000 foot remove. Hindsight's 2020. That could be the thing that you're intending to add. But it really kind of depends on, if you have a voiceover, what do you think you're adding with it? Because if you're not adding anything, then you're detracting.
And I will say too that if you're doing a modern noir and you're doing voiceover, it's impossible to separate that voiceover from the years of noir voiceover that we've already experienced. Like, you're not, like, your voiceover doesn't exist in your movie alone. It exists within the context of this is what people have been doing. And so, in general, by now, you're expected to do something unique with it. Like, have an unreliable narrator, or have it be some sort of twist on it, like using language that you wouldn't normally use in noir, or doing something like Brick, where it's like about high school and like you're playing with the genre that way.
What's great about Brick, though, is that they don't have a voiceover.
Yeah.
At least in the script.
Huh.
That's cool.
It's been a while.
There are a few moments where I think they do it, but like it's very restrained, and it's not at all like in the beginning pages.
It's just like, now if you were gonna do a noir TV show or something, like, I think Jessica Jones does voiceovers sometimes. I think. I was just looking to see if we had the script. But it's like, I think they get away with it partially because Jessica Jones is not your typical investigator. And so you have that unique layer to it. And then also, I'm not even saying that that's like the best part of that show anyway. You know, it's
I mean, I would love to just take a normal dramatic scene and add a voiceover and slow jazz, and it's, no matter what the scene is about, it's immediately a noir.
Yeah.
One time I turned on Daredevil, and I don't know if you've seen it, but there's actually an option that you can click where it's for people who are visually impaired, and it's him narrating what's going on. And at first I was like, what is, like, I turned it on by accident and was watching it, and I was like, when are they going to stop this voiceover? I mean, like, it was really compelling the way they did it, but I was like, okay, now they're just literally saying like punch to the face, something, something, something. And I was like, what? But
The man stands and turns to his friend.
they did it's so well done. But it was very confusing when I thought it was actual just voiceover. And honestly, watching that could give you a sense of like what not to do for voiceover, because like, you know, it's just describing what's on the scene, and at first you're like, okay, I'm rolling with this, but then it keeps going and you're like, this is redundant. And I think a lot of times we might do that in our own scripts without realizing it.
I think it's true. And, you know, an example that I just started sort of thinking about while you're describing that is Goodfellas, where you know, at no point does his voiceover, which is entirely throughout the entire film, at no point does his voiceover ever just kind of say, she walked from the car to the store. You know, like, she walked down the sidewalk, unsure of what to do next. Like, it's never that. And it would have been so easy to do that, because that's the thing you're describing, and that's the easiest trap to fall into, just describing what's going on. You're doing that when you're writing a script anyway. That's in your descriptions. Might as well just change the formatting a little bit. But what makes the voiceover in that movie interesting is, again, it sort of gives it that whole past tense vibe, but also it's filtered through a character's perception. And what we are learning is who this person was and how these things affected him personally and all of his blind spots. But then you're still learning a lot from visuals. You're still learning a lot from what you are seeing. That is separate from that thing. So it never sort of doubles up, you know?
Right.
Because otherwise it is kind of like we said. Like, there was a movie I watched, the big blockbuster type, definitely went through multiple rewrites as it made its way to the screen, because that's how, you know, the bigger the budget is, the more, you know, drafts you get. And there's a bit of mythology that gets explained as exposition later in the movie as the character is learning it, which is already clunky. But they added a voiceover to the opening scene before we meet anybody. That's just sort of like the camera is, you know, helicoptering over a city or droning over a city, whatever the kids are doing these days. And the voiceover is like, I am part of this group. There are two factions of this group. This faction believes in this, but this faction believes in that. We have been at war for generations. And you listen to that and you're thinking, this is information we're definitely going to learn as the story goes on, right? And then, of course, we do. And so I looked up the original script, and it wasn't in the original script. It definitely wasn't in the original script. In fact, the information that they were voiceovering about in the first place, the idea of there being factions, was not in the original script. So sometimes you'll find these voiceovers that are clunky, and there will be the products of producer notes of, oh, this thing doesn't really make much sense. Let's add in this information. Oh, now we've added this information, but that doesn't really make much sense. Let's have somebody explain it to the audience. And, you know, there's such a big note behind that note that is just being addressed incorrectly. The note behind that note is just that there's something about the story that is not comprehensible to the audience. But, you know, if you don't have the power to solve that in a dramatic way, somebody's just going to add it as a voiceover.
Or you just have a producer who really, really is just like, I want it to be clearer, until until the writer gets fed up and says, fine, and adds a voiceover. It's like, there are two factions.
Yeah.
You know? Like, I can see that being a possibility.
Yeah. I was reading an interview with Eric Heiser. We were talking about Arrival, and how one of the drafts, one of the producer questions was, how are we going to tell the aliens apart? And he's like, I'm not sure we need to tell them apart. He's like, no, but we need to tell them apart. And so he did a draft where one of the aliens wears a shoulder pad and the other one wears a belt, you know, like that kind of a thing. And it's like, fine, you happy? And they're like, nah, you're right, it was better without that.
Sometimes you just got to do the note to show them how silly the note is.
And then sometimes it stays in.
And then sometimes they accept your voiceover and you're screwed.
People love the sound of their own voices, and they love to pee on things. You know, like, oh, I did that.
I'm peeing on things right now.
And Dylan knows what movie you're talking about and said, I think Avi said, lore isn't inherently interesting about that voiceover in the past. So
it's true. Lore is never inherently interesting. All we really care about is how it affects the characters and their relationships. And if you're, if you can convey that visually, to the degree that you need to, like coming back to Dune for a second, just because it's fresh in my mind, because I just watched like 3 versions of that story on screen. I thought that the 84 version was incredibly tedious because they were really concerned that we wouldn't get it, so they're explaining at every single turn, usually through voiceover, what the terms mean, what the characters are thinking, all of that. The new version, there's a whole lot that I don't know. Like I can kind of guess from the previous versions of the movie, but there's a whole lot of stuff that isn't clear. But at least in my experience, I didn't care, because the stuff that I did care about, which is the character relationships, like I don't necessarily know what the whole politics situation is, or what that term means, or what that cult does, or whatever, but I know what the son thinks of his mother, and I know what the mother thinks of the father, and I know what strain they are feeling about each other, and we're picking it all up from context to the extent that it's important, because all we really care about is, will this family be okay? And it always comes back to that. So if you're writing your voiceover, just remember, if you're worried that we're not going to necessarily pick up on some piece of lore, that doesn't really matter so much. What matters is that we comprehend the impact on the people.
Imagine, if you will, A Quiet Place with voiceover.
And they do the closest thing to that, which to me feels like a producer note, which is when we're going through the house, there is a big wall that has newspaper headlines and a list of weakness. Their sound, they follow sound, is their weakness, and it's all, it's visually, it's on screen, but it's the same essentially. It's the same thing. Like, there could be a voiceover of John Krasinski saying, "They follow sound. If only there was a weakness." I'm still here. I just had to drop out for a quick second.
Oh, okay.
No worries.
But yeah, imagine, God, what a freaking
I'd watch that movie.
Yeah, like, we can't make a sound, and then you show them creeping around. It'd be excellent. This is an interesting note from Maxim. Did you know that the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones had a no voiceover, no flashback, no dreams rule? They broke it in the later and weaker seasons.
The showrunners had a term for something that they did, particularly in the first season, which I don't think they're very proud of, which was, if they felt like there was information they needed to deliver and they didn't know how to dress up the exposition, they would do it in a sex scene, and they would call it sexposition.
They really did that on purpose, because that's what I felt like was happening. And
they did it on purpose.
They did it on purpose, and it worked for a lot of people, because they were like, "Whoa, look at that!"
It's like,
what? They did that on purpose?
In Save the Cat, there's this idea of like Pope in the pool, where he's like, if you want to dress up exposition, have something really weird happening on screen that distracts you. Like, what if the exposition happens while the Pope is swimming in a pool, and you're like, why is the Pope in a pool? And it's like, I get that to a degree. That's more of a crutch if you need one. But like, that again, that's only going to get you so far. You have to figure out how to make that exposition dramatically interesting, as opposed to just dress it up. And I think voiceover, to a degree, is just dressing it up.
Yeah. Sexposition.
That
is ridiculous. Because I remember being like, I don't want to see this. I just don't want to right now. And then I'd skip forward and I'd be like, wait, did they say something important in the middle of that
Every
scene?
time. Every time. And I guess to a degree it worked, but I think they generally stopped doing that. I don't think they're proud of it. I think they just kind of figured, like, we had information to deliver and we had a hard time delivering it. And
then it justifies the scene, because now you need it, because apparently information's there. You can...
Yep.
You can cut corners. You can cut corners all the time and do things like that to justify these scenes you want. The sex justifies the exposition, and the exposition justifies the sex, and then now the scene is just like this mess of nothing that somehow gets to stay in the show.
They had a certain quota of sex scenes they had to meet too. Like how do you get your allotted sex scenes out and your exposition, put them together.
Okay, imagine now if they did that with voiceovers. So they're having a sex scene, and the voiceover is, if I move against this house on this date, then maybe I could conquer this castle.
That's really good. I don't trust the Greyjoys.
But you know what that would tell you? You know what that would tell you as an audience? It actually might even be better than doing exposition in that scene, because that tells me that character is very myopic. That tells me that character is very single-minded, and there's a lot that is not particularly interesting to that character that might be interesting to other characters. That might actually be more interesting than actually having the characters have a conversation.
And Dilla, that is not the takeaway. That is not the takeaway.
Alexie's
the more I think about it, it might be the takeaway.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, but it's tricky because I feel like it's a tightrope, right? Where it's a tightrope over a pit of spikes. You can walk it really perfectly, and it's great. If you walk anything less than perfect, you fall into the spikes.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh.
1 second. I'll get back to you in a second. I'm just communicating with my sister as to where our Airbnb is. Because we are in Utah for a film festival, and my sister has just arrived.
Well, we are coming up on 5 o'clock, so we can about call it for the day, especially if you have to run.
Well, I'm doing it. I just had to send that address, but yeah, what kind of wrap up, like, Alexie and Adam, like, what if you had a very specific takeaway for writers who are not sure how to approach voiceover, how would you sum it up?
I would say anytime you write voiceover, I'm just going to give a tip for it real quick. Anytime you give voiceover, read the scene as if it didn't have voiceover, and then be honest with yourself about what it conveys, and then read the scene with voiceover and be honest with yourself about what changes. And that can be a way to decide if the voiceover is even doing work in this scene. Like, is this doing anything for me to actually evaluate later? So I would say that to me is like step one of evaluating if voiceover should stay, is read it with and without and see if it's doing anything at all. That would be my big first step.
For me, I would think going into it, like, whose voice is this and how are you going to be consistent as a design principle of the story? But at the end of the day, if you evaluate it, does this reveal character or reveal some new information about the plot? Like, those are the two things that are important, because like you could have a justification for, well, it's helping the tone of the scene, and I personally don't think that's as fundamental as character information that's dramatic and revealing, or plot information that's dramatic and revealing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess the one that I would add is, if you write voiceover, ask yourself, what does this demonstrate, kind of aside from what it's telling? What does it demonstrate, and what work does it allow the audience to still do? Because if you're just doing the work for the audience, they won't thank you for it. They'll probably resent you for it. So make sure that you're still giving them work to do.
For sure. And Adam, real quick, since you touched on the design principle thing, I feel like maybe that's a good note to wrap up on. Just talk a little bit, really quick, about what you mean by a design principle in terms of using
that's just a fancy term for being consistent and having good internal justification, right? Like, if you have a voiceover in the beginning of your film just to introduce things, but then it's like not really a part of the film overall, or like the sort of promise, if it's not really connected to what you're doing as a whole, you probably don't need it. So whatever you do, just be consistent and be thoughtful as possible.
And if you want to use voiceover in the middle of your film for one scene, probably don't, unless you can justify that. Unless you can like set that up as like, this is part of the design of my film, I'm occasionally going to have voiceover. doing like a random one-off often will be very startling to your audience. So as like a design principle, if you want to use voiceover, then figure out how you're going to use it, when it's going to show up, what's justifying it, and then be consistent. Don't just have it show up because you really can't figure out how to do this one scene in the middle without it.
Right, like in How to Train Your Dragon, they bookend. Right, they don't just sort of
Right.
they don't just sort of discard of it. Here's a bit of maybe useful information now that I think about it. Because one of the mentors I was talking to at Cinestory had a really good piece of advice, general, which is don't have character epiphanies happen in the middle of a montage. You know, like they happen before the montage or after the montage, but they need to happen kind of in their own space. And I wonder if when it comes to epiphanies, maybe you want to avoid voiceover too. Like, how do you, like, I have to assume that a scene where a character realizes something is probably undercut if that realization is brought to you via voiceover.
Yeah.
Right? You know? So like you don't want voiceover to kind of substitute for that sort of thing. Big
For sure.
character arc moments.
It's the same with flashback. It's like you don't want, like, you want to be in the moment with your characters when the most important things happen. And so in general, that means that they should not be happening like in flashback, and probably shouldn't be happening in voiceover or montage either.
The good stuff should be in scene, you know? Let the actors let the actors have an opportunity to bring stuff to life. You know, let the actors do something. If they're voiceovering after the fact, it's like taking away from the performance in the moment.
Montage would be another cool topic to get into.
It would be. It totally would be.
That.
Maybe next week.
There's so many varieties.
Yeah, because we need to send out our November schedule.
That's a great idea.
So let us know if there's a topic you want us to get into in the future, by the way. You can comment here right now or in our Discord. And I still want to do this, even if we haven't picked a movie. On Sunday, we're going to be watching a movie at the same time in the Discord, some sort of horror film. Maybe, Avi, if you have any recommendations, so we can all react and go, and text at the same time. So
that's a hard one. What's a good horror movie that you can also be texting through?
The implication is pretty clear.
You're live tweeting it, you know, but to your buddies. Endings is another good topic. Yeah, we should definitely do an endings one. But yeah, so in the Discord we'll announce it hopefully today or tomorrow what we're gonna all be watching and when, and then we can watch a horror film on Halloween together. Voting for Scream. That's honestly what I was thinking too, because I've been thinking Scream or Halloween because I haven't seen either one, and I think I should.
Ooh, Scream, I think, would be the perfect one. Scream would be the perfect one.
Let's do it. Scream it is. Scream
Sounds
on
good.
Sunday, everybody. We'll set a time soon.
I wish I could join you on that. Scream is such a blast.
Oh man. Next time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming, everybody. I hope that this was helpful, and thank you, Avi. We love having you here, so anytime you can.
Always happy to be here when I can.
Thanks for coming in all the way from Salt Lake. Hope you enjoy the
people skateboarding behind my head.
It was adding to the ambiance of
yeah, you know.
Immortalized forever on our YouTube channel.
Wonderful.
They don't even know they're famous. All right.